So without further ado, I just want to hand the mic over to her.
Thank you so much, Maloney, and thank you to Evaluation, Milwaukee Evaluation, and thank you to Nicole and other folks on the planning committee. It really is a pleasure to be here today. I can testify that wishes can come true. In the late fall, I said that I wish that this event was in the spring because I would like my first visit to Wisconsin to be in the wintertime. And thanks to the polar vortex. So I'm really glad to be here. And again, this is my first time in Wisconsin and everyone has been so hospitable. So very excited to be here to share some of what my team at the Casey Foundation has done, but also more so excited to be here, to be in a room full of people who are interested in this topic, to hear the experiences from Kate, Lamont, and others in their work, because we are on a journey and we're on the early part of our journey. We have so much to learn, so I'm really excited about this bi-directional exchange and appreciative again of all of you here. So I wanted to just begin by sharing a little bit about the Annie Casey Foundation, and I realize that I am short on time, so I'm going to go kind of fast on these earlier slides and perhaps some of the later slides so that there's sufficient time for the Q&A. But this is the mission of the Annie Casey Foundation, and we basically are doing work to improve the lives and create brighter futures for children in the United States. Our programmatic work is divided roughly into 3 areas: family, opportunity, and community. We have a juvenile justice and child welfare reform work that's under our family category of programs, opportunity, where our Center for Economic Opportunity sits, and then place-based work in Baltimore and Atlanta, where we have civic sites represent community, and we also have a handful of national community projects. And you may be familiar as well with some of the policy work that we do that also sits in these buckets, and the policy team also helps to produce broader products that help to elevate the work of children broadly across the United States. So a good example of that is the Kids Count data that some of you may be familiar with. And then I'll just move really quickly through this. This is basically saying that the unit that I work within, the Research Evaluation Evidence and Data Unit, we produce data and help to create evidence through our investments that help to support the work of the programmatic units. In this example, we're showing how our strategies in the yellow box support the result of the family programs. At Casey, we believe that we'll never fully achieve the results we seek without incorporating a racial and ethnicity, equity, and inclusion lens in every facet of our work. Our current policies and practices in the social sector, we believe, are not equipping enough of our children to meet milestones in areas like education, well-being, employment, and health that will really help to contribute to prosperity in the communities where those children live, but also prosperity for our country overall. Racist policies of the past have disconnected children of color from these building blocks of opportunity, and some of these systems and structures persist to hold us all back today. So this has prompted us to really shift our thinking away from focusing on identifying disparities that separate different types of children to creating equitable opportunities to help all children thrive. Whether we're looking at policies, outcomes, power, and privilege, issues around relationships and solutions, when we use a race equity lens, it allows us to see our context in new and revealing ways. In 2014, Casey published the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Action Guide, which outlines 7 steps to advance and embed race, equity, and inclusion within organizations. How many of you are familiar with this publication? Some of you are. This is available on our website, and there are a series of tools that go along with each step to advance race, equity, and inclusion. And this is information that we now share with our grantees and provide capacity building opportunities and training around this. And obviously, this is available to anyone in the social sector that wants to bring these race equity tools to their communities. And it really comes out of a charge that the president of the foundation at the time, this is again 2014, really wanted all the programmatic units and capacity building units across the foundation to incorporate race, ethnicity, equity, and inclusion into our work, so that it's not something on the side, it's not a special grant program, it's not a special unit, but all of our work in some way was to really address racial and ethnic equity and inclusion. And again, one example of how we do that is by providing capacity building resources to our grantees. Our research and evaluation team sought to incorporate efforts to embed racial equity into our work. And I wanted to first start off by just sharing how culturally responsive evaluation kind of fit into that picture. And with CRE, we really saw an opportunity to elevate the voices of people in the communities that we serve that are often people of color. More importantly, we saw this as an opportunity to share power with community in new and different ways and acknowledging the challenges inherent in that. So what might this look like? What would it look like to elevate community voice, share power, and contribute to equity in the evaluation and learning process? CRE was one approach that interested us, and I want to fast forward a bit to 2018 to give you an example from one of the evaluation projects that we supported. It's the evaluation of the Couples Acting Together project, or CAT project, which is run out of the Center for Urban Families in Baltimore, which is a well-known program nationally, actually for strengthening families and community. The CAT project targeted low-income African-American couples in Baltimore City who are learning strategies and receiving supports to help them build on their existing strengths that will enable them to help reach their goals around strengthening family and self-sufficiency. Casey provided a small grant to supplement an existing evaluation of the CAT program to allow the evaluators to enhance one component using a culturally responsive approach. And just for a little background, the families experience a number of barriers to self-sufficiency that are related to the systems that they're involved in, particularly the family and child welfare agencies that all the families interacted with. In particular, the families viewed a flawed social services system that traditionally supported the mothers to the detriment of the fathers, and ultimately to the detriment of the families. This project offered the CAT couples an opportunity to assess policies and practices that impacted them in these systems and offered the couples a platform to share their insights with key system managers and policymakers. So how did the evaluation team approach this work? Their goals were to create a diversity of thought and practice informed through a community and client-centered approach. The team used a participatory approach. For example, they involved an advisory board called the Learning Journey Advisory Board, which included some CAT couples, to reflect upon and provide feedback on the research questions and the data collection instruments. The team gave attention to cultural and historical context. For example, the team met with CAT couples in their community context to provide ample opportunities to evolve and challenge frames that emerged from the various stakeholder groups involved in the data collection, which were predominantly the program staff or the system managers and system policymakers. And there were power dynamics involved, but certainly there were also often different cultures involved. The team also utilized 2 data collection methodologies, insight facilitation and concept mapping, that were intended to elevate the evaluation into a transformative enterprise that delivered diverse, equitable, and inclusive solutions, and didn't rely on or feel the need to have a quantitative data approach, but really saw these qualitative approaches as a way of knowing and understanding. It's important to point out that the team came to the work, again, as part of a broader evaluation project where they've already done work to really understand how power is held, exercised, and shared or used oppressively in this context. They also had an understanding of whose values are marginalized and whose values are privileged. The data collection methodologies were intended to address issues of power and privilege in service to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. The team also utilized a strength-based frame. They speak of the work products incorporating the CAT couples' intelligences. This is just one way they affirmed the assets and strengths of the CAT couples, as opposed to framing the process as only needing the expertise of the evaluators or the knowledge and experiences of the system partners. They also practiced equitable dissemination. They created a 2-page visual report infographic as part of the dissemination products that were targeted to the CAT couples. And they did some capacity building. One of the wonderful outcomes of this project was that this led to an interest in changing some legislation. So there are some CAT couples that are involved in planning to share the project's data and recommendations to influential decision makers that promise to change system level policies. So that is an example of a CRE project that we funded, and it gives you an idea of the different approaches that were used that for us are very unlike the traditional evaluation approaches that have been employed in our work. And it also shows for us the return on investment that we have, not only in terms of the products at the end, but how this process helps to empower the participants and helps them to grow through the capacity building that was provided in ways that can have ripple effects and ultimately help to contribute to equitable outcomes in their community beyond their involvement in this project. And sorry that you had to sit through this one slide. I don't have slides from the project. And I wanted to point out the evaluation team, led by 2 women, Mindalyn Anderson, who is on the left, and Jerry Lynn Peak, who's on the right. They're both committed to equity and the use of culturally responsive approaches. They're new collaborators. They were brought together by their involvement in a pipeline capacity building program called LEAD that I'm going to talk about a little later. And they started out in a mentor-protege relationship, and through that work, they began to collaborate on projects. And this was their first project collaboration. The CAT project addressed one of the challenges that we wanted to address with our new efforts to embed REI strategies. REI is short for Racial and Ethnic Equity and Inclusion. We call it REI. It really shows how we wanted to address how to embed REI strategies in our work. So first, too many of our evaluations are undertaken without input from members of the community, and as a result, we believe that we are pursuing objectives and research questions that are not the most important to the people that we're serving, and methods that are destined to not produce the most optimal results or even fail. Another problem that we wanted to address was that culture, history, structural and institutional racism were not being addressed in our research questions, our designs, and our methods. And again, with this new racial and ethnic lens, and if you can recall those different steps in the tool, we really felt that that kind of deep dive was really needed, especially if we're advocating for that in the programmatic work. We also observed that people of color are underrepresented in the evaluation teams that we engage in our work. And it's a phenomena that's been shared already, and certainly a phenomena that our other peers across the country in philanthropy have expressed. Networking, referrals, and repeat contracts, as many of you know, are how most of us in philanthropy identify the pool of evaluators that we want to contact for services. But while efficient, these hiring practices really limit the pool of evaluators to those who are already in. So we see this as a systematic bias that limits opportunities and serves to exclude diverse perspectives and exclude knowledge of the communities often being served by programs and systems. And I think that that's an important point because we believe that this is really about elevating the excellence in research. There is a social justice imperative as well to ensure that people who have limited access and opportunities, especially those where there's been a history of that throughout the history of this country, there is a social justice imperative there as well to make sure that we are providing those opportunities in a way that produces more access. But we really believe that by having those different perspectives, by having shared lived experience, by having people who are culturally responsive and reflective of their practice, and that is really key to elevating the quality of our work. And so with that, I want to transition a bit to talk about the Expanding the Bench work that we launched in 2014, which was really where we started. So we began our deep dive into REI, focusing on how we can increase access to opportunities for underrepresented evaluators. So the first program I want to point out is the Advancing Collaborative Evaluation Network, which was established to identify underrepresented evaluators and leaders in evaluation firms who could become part of a network that philanthropy and other consumers of evaluation, producers of evaluation, could easily contact. This is some of the information about who's included, and we have an actual database that will be publicly available in 2019. Currently, you contact the manager of the ACE network and they will do some brokering. This is just kind of an update. We had our first round of applications for the ACE network, our first call for qualification in 2015, and we did the same in 2018, our second call, and we now have a total of 92 evaluators and evaluation firms that are part of the ACE network. And this is just a quote from our director that talks about the benefits of doing this, which is around viewing issues or problems from multiple perspectives and vantage points, expanding our knowledge base, and making for better science and social innovation. This just talks about some of the capacity building that we provide to members of the ACE network, so that while they are part of this network, they are growing in their capacity around topics such as culturally responsive evaluation. They're also getting some support around their business development. So here's some examples of things that we've done. We have an annual luncheon at the American Evaluation Association meeting where ACE network members and funders come together and have an opportunity to meet and we had a panel at the most recent AEA meeting. This is just some metrics that we've been collecting that just show kind of our progress to date and areas where we could be improving, but it just gives you a sense of kind of the current demand or the demand over time for referrals from the ACE database. And here are some quotes from ACE Network members and funders. One ACE Network member said, "I enjoyed having the opportunity to hear from funders and meet folks from foundations we aren't currently in touch with, and the push to get our materials out to them." And one funder said, "I love meeting with Native American evaluators. I'm proud of ACE's commitment to identifying researchers of diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds and being inclusive of Indigenous people." The second major initiative of expanding the bench was a capacity building program that I mentioned Midland Anderson from the CAP project was part of. This is the first cohort of leaders in equitable evaluation and diversity. It's a pipeline for talented established researchers to become evaluators who are committed to equitable evaluation and the use of culturally responsive approaches. So essentially, it targets researchers who are currently not evaluators, or we've also included evaluators who are practicing but haven't had formal training in culturally responsive evaluation, and it takes them through a year-long program that involves an online evaluation certificate program, now through the American University, mentorship, and a residency placement at a research organization. Here's some examples of some of the placements for the residency, and it's a virtual residency because people have jobs and families and commitments, so they work on a small component of a larger evaluation study. And here's some of the funding partners to date. And one part of the residency that was added to the second cohort that started in 2017 was to actually create a proposal or set of recommendations for how the project might further advance approaches like culturally responsive evaluation. What we found was that often when the evaluators started working with a project, because they didn't start with that foundation, it was difficult to do integration. So we still encourage that, but they were tasked with actually creating a proposal, which then acted as capacity building for that evaluation team and really helped to open the eyes of those partners around the promise of culturally responsive evaluation and similar approaches. And also a number of the scholars presented their work at AEA in Korea, so that was really exciting. This just talks about some of the updates. I think I have 8 minutes left, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. But you can feel free to ask questions. I think the bottom line is that LEAD has really served to help the participants to become networked with their mentors and with the host sites in ways that continue to help them down the trajectory of building a career in evaluation and one that's grounded in using culturally responsive and other approaches. And this is just a quote from one of the scholars. And we incubated expanding the bench, so we learned some lessons that we have been sharing with the broader field. One of the biggest lessons is that it's not something that one foundation should be doing. It's really something that the entire field owns. And so we've spun off this work to Change Matrix, a firm that has primarily focused around evaluation, done some TA work, but really felt their mission was aligned in this way to carry on. Operating LEAD and the ACE network, so they're doing that. and we are, myself and Kimberly Spring, the director of our research and evaluation team, are champions of that work. And be more than glad to answer more questions about the future of expanding the bench and where that is now. But I wanted to quickly transition to share with you some of our practices in our internal work. So even though expanding the bench was really something that we shared with the field, we really needed the ACE database. And we really needed to have more evaluators with culture responsive competencies. And so what we've been doing is tracking how well are we advancing in incorporating and engaging teams that are more diverse. And so I just wanted to share, this is a performance management profile. This is my profile, actually. So it shows the number of evaluation projects that I manage, and then breaks down by senior level and mid-level, the number and percentage of researchers of color on teams in the projects that I manage. And then, so everybody on our team that manages projects has this kind of profile, and then we have an overall team profile as well. And I'm not going to go through the numbers. The point is that we do this tracking, and we have a point twice a year where we sit and think about these data and reflect on how we're doing and what, if any, changes and shifts in practice we want to make. And this is just a graphical description of the team-wide data. Another practice shift that we've made is to be more thoughtful around the evaluator selection process. We often, we have a history of sole source contracting, and we've been trying to really press to move towards having more RFPs. And the ACE database has been really helpful in allowing us to identify a pool of evaluators that we can tap into. We just don't have the capacity to do a public dissemination, which may resonate with many of you. And we certainly don't want to invite folks to apply that really is not a good fit. So the ACE database has been really helpful in giving us confidence that we can have a good pool. And we've changed some of the language in our RFPs, and all of us have been kind of doing it individually. So one of the future ideas that we have is to really create a boilerplate RFP that's consistent across the board in terms of the language that we use in describing what we're looking for. So this is just an example of how we are talking about team diversity and what we're looking for. And I'm really excited to have information from Case, because I think in the Colorado Health and others, because I think we can definitely build on how we do this. But just wanted to give you an example. And we have also developed scoring guides. Haven't had sport, but they've already existed. We've added sections that speak to rating the team diversity and other aspects of diversity that we want to see brought to the project. So this is just an example of that. So some additional ways that we've elevated REI in our work. We at all times try to ensure that we can analyze disaggregated data. Sometimes it's not possible, it's not feasible to do, but we make data analysis by race and ethnicity something that is pretty lockstep. And some newer ways that we're looking at data analysis is around intersectionality, especially in our systems work. For example, a lot of the LGBTQ youth in systems tend to have the worst outcomes, and they also, at the same time, are youth of color. So we are more intensively looking there. We're also really trying to make sure that at the beginning of the project, even when we're conceptualizing it, before we even bring on the evaluation partner, to really think about how to incorporate issues of structural racism, understanding the history of the community, and other research questions that are more grounded in the racial and ethnic equity lens. And then here are some other things that I think are really exciting. We have one project in East Baltimore where we've engaged community members in the co-design of an evaluation as an advisory group. And the interesting thing about this is that this group is actually seen as being ongoing and having their own research program and actually identifying researchers that they want to work with to answer their own questions. So that's something that's really exciting. We've also provided community members with access to their data through data walks on some of our projects so that they can support the interpretation of the data. We've involved community in dissemination of evaluation projects. On one of the projects that I lead, we have a community review committee that's comprised of people from the coalition who are representing the interests of the community, who are helping to review proposals for conferences, proposals for journals. We have a evaluation team that is very eager to get information out, and things were happening really fast, and before even the moving beyond the pilot of the project. And so this was a way to create a way for community input and gatekeeping and making sure that their community was represented in the way that they felt was most appropriate, and it also contributes to transparency. We've identified opportunities to examine community assets and produce strength-based data visualization. We had a speaker come in, Yashimat Milner, Data for Black Lives, who came to talk to one of our group of grantees as a guest speaker, and she talked about how we often create data visualizations and frame data in ways that perpetuate pathology. And so we've been really challenged around thinking differently around how we share data. And then we recently had one of our colleagues conducted a retrospective reflection on opportunities to integrate an REI lens. So this is a great example of something I think we can all do. He had some unused funds in a project that had no REI lens, no culturally responsive approach, and said, okay, evaluation team, let's look back and see where there were missed opportunities, and really analyze that, examine that, and let's have time for the entire team to reflect on it. And this is just another performance measure that we have around the number of research and evaluation projects that engage communities in research and evaluation. And we haven't changed between 2017 and 2018. So this is where I'm going to end. I have a couple more minutes. Okay. So I just went through all the different ways that we're attempting to elevate REI in our work. And they really happened in a somewhat haphazard manner because we realized that there was something happening in the project where we felt that community voice wasn't being elevated, or we were missing an opportunity to really understand a problem. But we have not had a systematic and intentional planning process to ensure that there is attention to REI at the very beginning of our evaluations. And so in 2018, after we began transitioning our big expanding the bench work to change matrix, we decided that it was time for us to really be intentional, for our team to really do a lot of capacity building around what is diversity, what do we mean by diversity, what do we mean by culturally responsive evaluation, and how do we systematically plan it in a way that we can get our program colleagues around the foundation to be on board and be equal partners, and then move beyond that to getting our evaluators and community, however that is defined depending on the situation, also involved. We decided to explore equitable evaluation as a framework that we could use to embed our equity focus. And some of you may be familiar with the Equitable Evaluation Initiative. It's targeted to philanthropy. In particular, it just launched maybe end of 2017. There's a website with information about what it is and the different ways that equitable evaluation challenges traditional evaluation orthodoxies. And it really resonated with us, and we felt that it built on what we were trying to do through expanding the bench for the field. So our first step was to begin to define what did equitable evaluation mean to our team. And we adopted a framework from the Equitable Evaluation Initiative. We added another component. These are the different areas that that initiative identifies. And then we added this last one about the community role in shaping and owning research and evaluation because of our own team's values around that. And then we started a formal engagement with the initiative. The initiative has something called practice partners, and we became a practice partners. And we began working with them to develop a tool that our team could use to plan evaluations with our program colleagues across the foundation, and ultimately, again, with our evaluation partners and with the communities that we worked with. We developed a draft tool over the last 6 months, and we're actually launching pilots of 2 projects that we have ongoing in May. And as part of that, the EE team helped to develop the tool with our team, and will provide coaching and kind of some other supports along the way as we're trying to implement. The process began with a retreat last September that the EE team facilitated, and I wanted to share a slide from that retreat that really resonated with our team, and I thought would be useful to show here. What we really appreciated was this notion of evaluation being done in service to equity, and equitable evaluation really being not about a particular methodology, but really about the doing of equity, of evaluation in service to equity. And that there could be many different ways to get there. So culturally responsive evaluation can be kind of the engine that moves it, but really the purpose for the aim of equitable evaluation is about doing this work in service to equity. There's really, what we see is that we are still in a process of learning. There still needs to be a lot of capacity building that we want to do ourselves. So complementing this work around creating the planning tool, our team has planned capacity building sessions throughout the year. And part of the secret to doing that was scheduling them at the beginning of the year because our schedules are crazy. But I think it's this kind of intentional planning that really helped us to kind of think through how we can do that and what we need to do. And there is great interest in really going deep into learning about responsive approaches, culturally responsive approaches, such as the one that I mentioned in the CAT project a little earlier. So I know that based on our experience with expanding the bench and with where we are currently, that part of the work moving forward is really figuring out as well how we embed culturally responsive approaches and extend our capacity building to our evaluation partners. So I have some thoughts about some of the implications of this work, especially as it relates to culturally responsive approaches, and I think they've been raised earlier. First of all, we really believe that it elevates the excellence of the evaluation. We feel a moral imperative as well. But we also understand that in terms of how we communicate this to people across the foundation at very different places around how they feel about racial equity, that this is really the point that becomes most important because everybody values having accurate data and a good foundation of evidence for learning. We also see this as putting the community interest at the center of the evaluation, and it challenges us because we have an agenda. We're honest, we have an agenda often, and our program colleagues want to see success points and want to hide what is not success. And I think this putting community at the center then challenges that. And similarly challenges us around issues of sharing power with the community, but it's necessary and important, and we've decided to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it also changes our resources, and it causes us to think about how we plan evaluations in terms of timeline, products, and certainly budget. But again, I think just having a more systematic planning approach will help us to be able to address these issues around resources in an upfront way. Okay, so I will conclude now. I think I'm way over time, but I'm so appreciative again of being here, and thank Maloney for really describing what Sankofa means, and as I move forward, but at the same time look back, what really gives me inspiration among many things and motivations, just thinking about and reflecting on how too many of the boys that I played with and went to church with, and young men who are my cousins and I worked with later on are no longer living because of gun violence. And it's not normal for someone to know more than 10 people who have been killed by a gun or another weapon. And as many of you know, the CDC doesn't even collect data around gun violence, and the FBI's data sucks. And I want to be a data warrior. I want to be in a place where I am contributing to an enterprise that is using data in a way to uplift and build, and not as a weapon, as it so often is. And so I leave you with the thought, the question, will you dare to be a data warrior? And really do what you can do in your space, whether small or large, to advance culturally responsive evaluation.
Thank you, Dr. Marie. That was really powerful. So we are going to transition to what we think is one of the most important part of these types of events is for the Q&A discussion. So I just want to invite the presenters to come sit up front, so you can be front and center, literally. I'm hoping that based on what all you've heard today, that there are some insights that you can think about and ponder, and also if some questions came up for you. And so now's the time particularly with all these presenters in the room, which are difficult to get in the same room at the same time, to ask those questions. And granted, not all of the questions may be answered. You may walk away with more questions, but we do think for these types of events, it's important to take advantage of this opportunity. And so in terms of logistics, we don't have a microphone set up for the audience, for the participants. So if you can speak loudly, that would we'd greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, I'm going to have to run my flats, and that's going to cut down on our Q&A time. And plus, you don't want to see me limping around. So to start out, does anyone have any questions? The panelists, yes, go ahead.
So I'm from the MATC Foundation. We're the largest institution that serves people of color in the state of Wisconsin. For those of you not from Wisconsin. The first and only time that I've ever seen anything from a funder request on equity, I should say there are two. One is Greater Milwaukee Foundation asks for the composition of your board with respect to people of color, which is good and important. But the second one was just recently when we submitted a collaborative application for the Advancing Cities competition for JP Morgan Chase, which specifically asked for culturally responsive evaluation and asked you to identify the evaluator. So that was the very first, and we reached out to some extent to Ubuntu at that time and some other folks in the area in our collaboration. But knowing the nonprofit sector now, so I know we're talking about evaluation from a funding standpoint, it's difficult for the funders to get their arms around and brains around this. If you just start putting it out to the nonprofits I feel are not going to know what you're asking for in the submission, are not going to have capacity on their own to figure out what that means potentially, and certainly may not have funding available on their own unless they put it as part of their response for an RFP in the budget, right? And so that's what we had found in that national competition for advancing cities. So I love that we're doing this. I love that we're talking about this. This is such important work, and it's something that will definitely drive us forward in Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin. How do we drive that also forward simultaneously on the nonprofit side? Because my perception of nonprofits is that just identifying outcomes measurements alone is complicated enough, but putting the culturally responsive piece of that on there, which is critical, in light of this conversation, how does that happen, I guess? And is there a best practice recommendation from any of you with respect to how can we up the ante from the nonprofit sector to be able to effectively respond and to have the funder segment drive those changes like we want, like we've been talking about, right? So it's worked both ways in the social, economic development, all the different things, neighborhood projects, but how do we do that? Complicated story, first question.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. The question sort of gets right to the heart, but I'm glad you asked it right away. I think for a local funder like us, we're really trying to step into and incorporate this thinking into what would be our sort of role as what we think of as sort of this sort of leadership in the philanthropic space. To create space for us to have conversations around what it means, not just to have equity strategy, but to have tools to sort of move that discussion forward in various ways. And, when it comes to the problem of evaluation is one of them. So if I was to go a little further, I think very encouraged to see a funder like Andy Casey be able to develop so many ways that funders like us can start paying attention to, how to build capacity in a local sort of network for evaluation space. So we're starting to look at how do we support people locally participating in some of the leadership development and evaluation skills development around this specific practice. Far to go further. It's an interesting question around, what drives what. So nonprofits are probably only going to do what the funders are asking to a certain degree. I've actually heard it said too that if nonprofits are doing sort of culturally responsible approaches, they're probably not, funders probably aren't going to hear about them because there's a conversation out there that says, well, look, if funders want to stay in sort of that deficit framing model of identifying problems and naming problems in communities and asking for indicators to show problems, do that. What you need to do is sort of develop an asset sort of mindset within your nonprofit operations on your own. And some of the work I'm doing right now is even honing in on how does a foundation like ours start putting resources out there to assist nonprofits actually do the type of learning and make operational changes that they need to make to sort of strengthen their equity-focused work. So just to wrap it up, I would just say, right now we are going to I'm personally working on designing a pilot process for what would a capacity building program look like for nonprofits. To be able to do the internal learning on equities, I think that's sort of square one. How do you create space for organizations and understand organizations well enough to know what types of learning activities they can engage in without being disruptive to the point where they can't do their day-to-day operations, or figuring out a way for nonprofits to be supported if they are going to pause their work to do learning. And so I think you go on from there to figure out, well, even how do you build up those available resources really in the community for those organizations to even know who to go to for evaluation, for equity-focused learning. And so for us, I think the big change for us is that we're going to put resources towards doing that. So does that get a little closer?
Yeah, good. That's good to hear.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, any of the other presenters have anything to add to that?
There's some time.
Okay, sorry, we'll go to the next question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I really appreciate the fact that many foundations are strong and intentional about moving toward the racial equity lens. But there was something that Nicole said that struck me. Still though I know that foundations, it's like they use words like evidence-based, things like that. And I do think foundations are going to have to be more innovative and riskier in terms of investments if they really do want to move the needle, because I know there's like underground organizations that are doing great work, but they might not be as adept at, filling out the reporting. And I just wanted to know what folks' reaction was to that, like creating spaces where folks might not know how to do the actual, applications or the reporting where you say you gotta have this outcome, that outcome, just things like that.
We have a newer grant program, the partnership program. All of our community grants are aiming at advancing health equity now. And we have our smallest grant program actually asks for applicants to submit videos. And so they don't have to be, they can be a cell phone quality video, they can be, where they just walk, around their organization or their community and submit an application. So I think that was kind of intentional in terms of like knowing that some of the organizations who are the most innovative may not have the largest budgets, and so we're trying to wrestle with that too, and how do we provide funding opportunities that are not the traditional funding process as well.
Any other questions? We have time for a couple more. Yeah, Monique?
Sorry, I just took a bite right now. Thank you all for your presentations and info, and really appreciative. I just wanted to know, and when we talk about equity on the institutional level, it involves all the individuals who are part of the institution as well, and the individuals engaging in the process of doing equity work is often disruptive and uncomfortable. And we know foundations and wellness work is meant to be the most comfortable jobs people get, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that, on the individual interpersonal level, what that disruption has looked like, felt like, how you engaged it, because the organization itself can't carry equity work unless people are doing some of that internal interpersonal work, which is often way more removed from them than they realize as the organization is moving forward. So hearing those struggles or just what that interaction has been, I think will be helpful as we think about advancing this work collectively.
I can take that one. So I think Casey's in a unique position because, as I mentioned, around 2014, the president charged everyone across the foundation to really incorporate REI across their work. And there was training associated with that. Yet and still there's been differential take-up. So I think that the training was helpful. So I wouldn't, not having capacity building within the organization. It does serve to create some level setting so everyone understands the same term. We all know what structural racism means, and we all understand the history of housing discrimination and racial and class segregation, how that contributed to what we have today in many urban areas. So we all have that base level knowledge, which I think is really important. But I do think that what was missing was probably giving people information about how to be critical and reflect on their own practices and feelings around that. And I know that in the evaluation space there has been more conversation around that. And I think it still needs to be, to your point, it still needs to be something that the institution acknowledges and provides a pathway to doing that and creates those spaces for people to feel safe in being vulnerable, in exposing some of their biases, perhaps, where they can talk through that. And I also wanted to mention that one interest that I have in terms of my own grant making is how do evaluation organizations actually embed at an institutional level culturally responsive evaluation as an example, because you can have many individuals who are interested in it and applying it in their practice, but it's much more impactful and helpful for the entire organization. And so that I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's an interesting conversation to have across the sector.
Any other questions?
So I guess I want to get practical. I want to hear from each one of you just like a takeaway that each one of us in the room can take back to our spaces, whether it be speaking out for something that you find was wrong. I liked how you brought that up, and it was really reflective. We had a lot to talk about, a lot of examples, but I just want to get more practical. You learn a lot of stuff here. There's a lot to absorb, and you get back to your place, and it's the same status quo. So, what would be one thing that you guys would suggest to all of us to take back to our spaces to make a difference and to actually get the CRE going?
I would say make an individual commitment to learning and self-reflection. I think, pulling that forward yourself and making your own personal commitment that you can make yourself accountable to and what you'll do. What resources are you going to seek out? What support and organizations are you going to either volunteer with or partner with who are different than the traditional culture that you're in? Where are you going to find those spaces where you're the minority? I think is probably what I would suggest.
I love that one. So there's a couple ways I would answer that. One is around, I think for everybody's organization and where they are in their organization, there's some part of it I think you have to try to figure out where your organization is, because I think a lot of organizations are going to be all over the place. Some you might have a champion here that really wants to do that in ways that, in the practical sense, you don't go around with picket signs probably in your job. You don't call out everything that's maybe wrong, but you do want to make note of it, and then start developing sort of tactical ways to do it. I think the other piece is, part of the work, and it kind of goes to the question that Monique asked. I sort of turn that around, but I'll say really quickly. I think for us as a foundation, kind of the conversations that we're starting to have too is how do we support the people who are developing practices in this work, or developing consultancies around this work. So that would be my answer to it. From our standpoint is, as you get to know the work, we got to break that who's who cycle of who's doing the learning work. And so it's, part of my charge and what I'm doing now is really trying to figure out what we're going to do equity focused learning and try to encourage nonprofits to do that. Who's going to do that? And really sort of supporting people and being able to do the work that they've developed. So, I'm trying to say more, but I think I just leave it at that.
I would go back to my comment during my talk around being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think it's really hard work, and there can be a lot of ambiguity. Certainly with innovation, it's change. Change is difficult, change is hard. Another piece that may not be comfortable, going back to increasing the diversity of teams, is around building your network. And I appreciated the earlier comments around how we tend to, when we come into a room or in a space, we're attracted to people who are most like us. So I appreciate your talk, you're being very honest, Kate, about in that job interview scenario, how we were attracted to the person who was most like you. And I think that can be uncomfortable to go into a space and try to be around people who are not most like you, and certainly following up with them and building a relationship. So feel like that's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable, but to keep moving forward, even if it's baby steps, and trying to enact new practices within your organization and yourself individually that will help to move the needle around equity.
So I want to go ahead and invite Quentin to do the closing remarks, but before, as he's walking up here actually, I wanted to note you have evaluation forms in your folder. They're in the last tab. If you are capable of multitasking while Quentin's talking and filling out the evaluation forms, we'd really appreciate it, but we'll also be sending out an email following this event so you can take time to fill it out then. All right, thank you, Quentin.
How is everybody? Good full day? Yeah. Who's all been, raise your hand if you've been challenged today in some way. Okay. We already put it down, so. Let's see. I have a big job, but I think our speakers made my job a lot easier. So I first want to start by thanking you all for being such a great audience and sticking with us today during this conversation. So give yourselves I think this information can be very difficult to digest and to take in. Hi everybody, we're here to talk about white supremacy today. How do you contribute to white supremacy? Very difficult information to digest, but you stuck with it. I'm gonna come back to this in a minute. Let me go down my list. I want to thank Milwaukee Evaluation, the Wisconsin Philanthropy Network, and the folks at Beta Philanthropy for, one, having us in this beautiful space, for providing the opportunity to have such an important discussion that's going to advance evaluation in our state. So let's give them a round of applause. All right, now it's time for me to go in a little bit. I think I should first start by sharing with you all how I came to this work. So my background is both in clinical and macro social work. And what drove me to this work was just the idea that there were people born into the world that did not have opportunities and access to live their healthiest, trauma-free life, to live their best life. I could tell you many stories. I won't do that today, but I have an unwavering commitment for thinking about how do we design, how do we protect neighborhoods and communities, but more importantly, the people and the families in our neighborhoods and in our communities. Before I jump into the summary, I want to just mention two things. Someone asked a question that I think is really important about culturally responsive evaluation. And it's my table partner from yes. I think that you can't have culturally responsive evaluation without culturally responsive program design and culturally responsive program implementation. Amen. You know, it's happening. And so we have to see culturally responsive evaluation happening in a larger context. And how do we move organizations? How do we move sectors in that direction? I certainly don't have all of the answers, but maybe a few of the answers, and we can certainly talk more offline. But when you think about the nonprofit sector as a market, how do you grow interest among consumers in a market? What does that mean? What do we have to do differently? How do we train people in academic programs differently? How are we connecting to universities? What does this mean in terms of your relationships with nonprofits? Not just thinking about putting language in an RFP, not just thinking about a technical assistance plan, moving beyond that, thinking about what that looks like, and how do you do it from an innovative lens? I think I'll jump to my main comments now. Milani introduced our time today by talking about Sankofa, both looking back, but always looking forward, taking all of the lessons and positivity from the past, not repeating things that we don't want to repeat, but moving forward. She said something that was really important. Evaluation requires critical reflection. How do we make the world better for the people that we serve? That is the purpose of evaluation. You all in your respective roles as funders, how do you make this world better for the people that you serve by responsibly being stewardships of dollars? What does that look like? Kate then got up here, and I'm gonna say we cried, but she said some really good things. Kate talked a little bit about the importance of sustainability through funding practices, focusing on capacity building. And she said, you know what? You may have to give people a little more money to do that. Dr. Murray also jumped on that bandwagon and said, hey, we gave out these supplemental grants for evaluation. Both of them also said it takes a little bit more time. And so there's this sort of thing that we need to think about. We have to be nimble in this work. How do we infuse nimbleness into our work? Kate also said some more things that I will mention. She said this, and I find this really interesting. She said, you know, I should have said something. I should have said something. Well, say something. That's what you do. You say something. Without losing your job, of course. But what's the appropriate context? Think about the timing. Think about the delivery of the message. Think about what the message actually is, and if the message needs to change based on who you're talking to. But say something. Kate said a bunch of stuff that really resonated with me. Treat people with dignity. That was like, how do we honor the people in our communities? Through evaluation. How do we honor people in our communities and the lived experience by funding work that makes a difference? Then Katie's just like, oh, it's a journey, ooh, it's kind of hard, it's kind of long. But she also said, challenge yourself. She said, connect with people who are different. Have humility. Connect with people who don't look like you. And she said, think about who benefits and who holds the power. So raise your hand if you think you have a level of power. Every hand should be raised. How do you activate your power in an environment of white supremacy? How do you activate your power when daggers are being thrown at you, even from co-workers who have a different perspective because of their positionality in life? Lamont then came on up here and dropped some bombs too, some really good nuggets. I'll just go over a couple of them. He started by saying, how did you come to this work? I think that's really an important question. What do you value? What is your motivation for being here? Because you don't have to be here, especially if you're going to be here in a space where you perpetuate white supremacy. Get out if that's you. But if your motivation is different, if you are grounded in something else, whatever that something else for you is, recognize that. Lamont dropped another, know your history. And I'm going to add, and don't be a revisionist to that. He also said, know yourself. So he talked a lot about culture and the social construction of each of our realities. And I think that's important. If you don't know yourself, one, you certainly don't know your power. Two, if you don't know yourself, how can you connect with other people who are selves? Dr. Murray then came on up and broke it down a little bit. She really broke it down. She was real nice about it though. I don't know if you saw her implication slide, but it was like, you should actually pull that back up. You can just read it while it's up here. But what she told us is, it's important to have a racial and ethnic equity and inclusion lens. And she started with a quote in her slide that said, it's important to, and through this lens, see your context in new and revealing ways. So there's something you're going to discover. There's new knowledge, new information that you're going to gain. And that can be challenging for us. We talk about how nonprofits manage change. How does a foundation manage change? How do you manage change at the where's Dr. Liston? At the intrapersonal and interpersonal levels? What does that look like? What's the barriers? What's the consequence of poorly managing change? I'm going to be done in a few minutes. It's 2:27. There are a couple of other things that I want to get through. Dr. Murray said that sometimes, in my own language, that there are strategic ripple effects. She didn't use that language, but I'm adding to it. That there are strategic ripple effects. So investing in engagement that is both participatory and emancipatory. What type of capacity building work happens with our constituents and our partners that has an enduring quality beyond a grant period? She said some really good things like focus on the methods and the analysis. And I'm going to add, you do that because of what you value. You measure what you value. You apply the appropriate method and technique based on what you value. The question truly is, what do you value? Evaluation is service to equity. That was like a nugget. Thank you. I'm like, that was a nugget. Evaluation is a service to equity. We all need space to think. These are difficult conversations. We need to be refueled. We all need some space to think. And then she said, will you paraphrase, are you a data warrior? What does that look like? What does it mean? How does it show up in your work? And I'll lastly sort of talk about the call to action. I'll just remind us of those. So what we want to do today, as you think about our time and what you do tomorrow, next week, next month, as you continue to talk with partners, as you challenge yourself, as you challenge your colleagues and your organization, is to expand your reach. Thinking about how you value people who have a different experience. What does this mean in terms of evaluators that you hire? How do you tap into networks that you're not tapped into? Is this just sending someone a LinkedIn request? What does that actually look like? 2, examine culture of the workplace. Lamont said something that was interesting, like, well, before you do anything, you need to figure out what's going on in the place that you work. Is that place ready? There's an assessment of the professional workplace that is really important. Operate from an anti-oppression lens, Nicole reminded us. Keep that front and center. How do you get yourself out of the matrix? Are you going to take a blue pill? Are you going to take a red pill? You know, where are you? Nicole also told us to think about methods in the evaluation section. Asking people, show me how your bias showed up as you conducted this work. How is that a limit in terms of how you are interacting with the data and the people who are part of the process? And lastly, which I think is extremely important, Nicole said you have to alter outcomes and align with social justice. And so as a social worker, I just have to say, everything starts with social justice, you should be guided by social justice, and you should end with social justice. Thank you.